Imagine living in a town where justice isn't just blind, it's buried. A place where those who speak out mysteriously vanish, and the ones sworn to protect are the ones pulling the noose. But what happens when they hang the wrong woman? A black woman is lynched by corrupt cops, her body left swinging as a warning. But what they don't know is who she really was. And the storm that's coming for them. This is a story of revenge, corruption, and long overdue justice, and trust me, you won't see the ending coming. But here's a question for you. Do you believe justice should be taken into your own hands when the system fails? Or does that make you just as bad as them? Let me know in the comments. I'm reading all of them, and tell me in the comments section where in the world you are watching from. And before we get into this story, make sure you like, subscribe, and share so you don't miss more powerful stories like this. Now, let's get started. The wind howled through the Georgia pines, whispering through the night like a ghostly warning. Deputy Roy Slater tightened his grip on the thick rope in his hands, his jaw clenched as he glanced around the moonlit clearing. The others stood behind him, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats, eyes gleaming with cold determination. Sheriff Clyde Mercer stepped forward, his boots crunching against the frost-kissed grass. "You sure about this, Sheriff?" One of the younger deputies asked hesitantly. Mercer spat onto the ground and sneered. "She killed one of our own. Ain't no way we're lettin' this slide." A few feet away, a black woman stood bound, her face bloody but defiant. She was tall, regal in the way she carried herself, even as her hands were tied behind her back. Her dark eyes burned like embers in the night, unwavering despite the noose they were preparing. "You fools don't know what you're doing," she said, her voice steady. Mercer chuckled. "Oh, we know exactly what we're doing." Roy hesitated for a split second. Something about this woman unsettled him. She wasn't pleading or screaming like the others had before. No, she was watching them. Studying them. It made his skin crawl. Mercer tossed the rope over a sturdy oak branch and tightened the knot. The woman's gaze never wavered. "Any last words?" The sheriff sneered. She smiled, a slow, chilling smile. "You should have done your homework." Before Mercer could respond, the night erupted with gunfire. A bullet tore through the sheriff's hat, knocking it clean off his head. Another clipped Roy's shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. The deputies scrambled for cover, but it was too late. Figures emerged from the darkness, their movements swift and lethal. Gunfire flashed like lightning through the trees. The deputies fired wildly, but their attackers were precise. Two men went down instantly, clutching their chests as blood sprayed across the ground. Roy ducked behind a tree, panting. Who the hell were these people? He risked a glance and saw one of them, a tall man in all black. Moving with military precision, his rifle spitting fire with every squeeze of the trigger, the sheriff was on his knees, clutching his side where a bullet had torn through him. "Who the hell are these people?" Roy whispered, his voice trembling. The woman still stood there, untouched, the noose hanging limply around her neck. "I told you," she said, tilting her head. "You should have done your homework." A figure emerged beside her, a man with grizzled features and a scar running down his cheek. He cut the ropes binding her wrists, his eyes never leaving the lawmen scattered around the clearing. "You all right, Commander?" he asked. Roy's stomach twisted. "Commander," the woman rolled her shoulders, rubbing her wrists where the rope had cut into them. "Just in time, as always, Jones." Sheriff Mercer groaned, clutching his wound. "Who the hell are you?" The woman knelt beside him, her face inches from his. "You made a mistake tonight, Sheriff," she whispered. "A very big mistake." A fresh wave of gunfire rang out, forcing Roy to duck lower. He could hear more of his men screaming as they were picked off one by one. This wasn't just a rescue. This was an execution. Roy felt his blood run cold as the truth hit him like a freight train. They hadn't just picked the wrong woman, they had just declared war. Roy's breath came in sharp gasps as bullets cracked through the air, cutting down his fellow deputies like wheat before a scythe. He pressed his back against the thick trunk of an oak tree, his trembling hands fumbling for his revolver. The chaos around him was unlike anything he'd ever seen. These weren't just some criminals coming to rescue a friend. No, this was a highly trained unit, executing a well-planned assault. The woman, whoever she really was, had called herself Commander. That word alone sent an icy bolt of fear through Roy's gut. Mercer was still on his knees, bleeding from the gut, his wide eyes locked on the woman as she stood over him like a reaper. "You think you run this town?" she murmured, crouching beside him. You think you're above consequences? Mercer coughed, blood dripping from his lips. He tried to laugh but choked instead. What? What the hell are you? She smiled, slow and cold. The end of your reign. Jones, the scar-faced man who had cut her loose, barked an order. 2 squads, push left. Take out the runners. A fresh wave of gunfire erupted. More deputies screamed as precise shots cut them down before they could escape. Roy dared to peek out from behind the tree and immediately regretted it. One of his fellow officers, Boyd, was sprinting toward his horse, desperation twisting his features. Before he could reach it, a single shot rang out. And Boyd's head snapped back. His body crumpled into the dirt, motionless. These people didn't miss. Roy forced himself to stay still, to breathe as quietly as possible. He needed to find a way out. But where? There were at least 10 figures in the darkness, moving with tactical precision, their gunfire relentless. The woman glanced toward the battlefield and nodded in approval. Efficient as ever, Jones. Jones smirked. We do our best, Commander. She turned back to Mercer. Tell me, Sheriff. How many innocent people have you lynched in these woods? Mercer swallowed hard. He was pale, sweating. He knew he wasn't making it out of this alive. Just doing my job, he rasped. Her eyes darkened. No, Sheriff. You were doing your job. Not the job. She stood, motioning to one of her men. Get him up. A burly soldier yanked Mercer to his feet. He groaned, sagging against the man, his boots dragging against the dirt. Roy knew he should run. He knew if he stayed, he'd end up like Mercer. But his legs wouldn't move. His breath was shallow, his hands shaking, and then, he felt the cold steel of a gun barrel press against the back of his head. Hands up, a deep voice growled. Roy's body obeyed before his mind caught up. His revolver clattered to the ground. Good boy, the man said, patting him down for other weapons. Now, don't be stupid. Roy was spun around and forced to his knees. He finally got a good look at the soldiers surrounding him. They wore dark tactical gear, no badges, no emblems, just a silent, disciplined deadliness. Their weapons weren't standard-issue rifles but military-grade firepower. This was no ordinary gang. The woman approached him now, her boots stopping inches from his knees. He dared to look up at her face. The moonlight framed her sharp features, the slight curl in her lips betraying an edge of satisfaction. Deputy Roy Slater, she said, as if reading his name off a file. Roy's blood turned to ice. You know me? He stammered, her smile widened just a fraction. I make it my business to know who's on the other end of the rope. Roy swallowed hard. She turned back to Mercer, who hung limply in the grip of the soldier holding him. Tonight, Sheriff, we turn the tables. Mercer's eyes widened in realization. He thrashed, struggling against the soldier's grip. Wait. No, you can't. The noose they had prepared for the woman was still hanging from the oak tree. She took it in her hands, testing the strength of the rope, before sliding it over Mercer's head. Tell me, Sheriff, she murmured. Any last words? Mercer gasped, eyes darting wildly. Please, he wheezed. Please, don't do this. She tilted her head. That's funny. I think some of your victims said the same thing. Jones gave the order. The soldier yanked the other end of the rope, hoisting Mercer off the ground. His legs kicked violently as he struggled for breath. Roy squeezed his eyes shut, bile rising in his throat. Mercer had been a cruel man, but watching him hang like that, Roy couldn't ignore the weight of it. The woman turned back to him. And you, Deputy Slater. What should we do with you? Roy dared to look up, his pulse hammering in his ears. I was just following orders, he stammered. She chuckled, shaking her head. That's what they all say. Jones lifted his rifle, but the woman held up a hand, stopping him. Not yet, she murmured. He might be useful. Roy's stomach churned. Useful. She crouched in front of him, her gaze unreadable. Tell me, Deputy. How far are you willing to go to survive tonight? Roy licked his dry lips. Whatever it takes. She smirked. Good answer. Then, with a snap of her fingers, 2 soldiers grabbed Roy by the arms and dragged him into the darkness. the clearing fell silent, except for the creak of the rope swinging beneath the tree. Roy Slater's boots scraped against the dirt as the two soldiers dragged him deeper into the woods. His pulse pounded in his ears, every breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He didn't know where they were taking him, but one thing was clear, he wasn't dead yet. That had to mean something. The woman, the one they had almost lynched, walked beside them, her expression unreadable. She had been seconds away from death, and now she was the one deciding his fate. The power shift made his stomach churn. They stopped in a small clearing. A campfire crackled in the center, casting flickering shadows on a cluster of men and women checking their weapons. They weren't dressed like common outlaws. Their gear was too organized, too precise. These weren't just fighters. These were soldiers. The woman stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Tie him up." The soldiers shoved Roy to his knees and bound his wrists behind his back. The rough rope cut into his skin as they secured him to a thick wooden post. His heart hammered against his ribs. She knelt in front of him, her dark eyes studying him. "You should be dead, Deputy Slater." Roy swallowed. "Why, you said I could be useful." A smirk played at her lips. "I did." Jones, the scar-faced soldier, approached with a rifle slung over his shoulder. "Commander, we should move soon. If there's a search party, they won't be far behind." She nodded. "Agreed. But first." She turned her attention back to Roy. "I need to know something." Roy stiffened. "What?" She leaned in, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "How deep does the rot go in your department?" Roy hesitated. He wasn't stupid. If he gave them names, he'd be a traitor. If he lied, they'd probably kill him. She sighed, standing up. "Let me make this simple, Deputy. We already know the answer. I just want to hear it from you." Roy clenched his jaw. Jones stepped closer, his voice like gravel. "We know about the hangings. We know about the cover-ups. We know your department doesn't just enforce the law, it breaks it." The woman crossed her arms. "What I want to know is this: are you just another cog in the machine? Or are you something more?" Roy's mouth was dry. "What does that mean?" Jones chuckled darkly. "It means, can you be turned?" Roy's breath hitched. You want me to work for you?" The woman tilted her head. "I want you to think." She crouched again, bringing her face level with his. "You've spent your life following orders. Have you ever stopped to question them?" Roy wanted to say yes. He wanted to say he'd never supported the lynchings, that he had been forced into it. But the truth was, he hadn't questioned it. He had let himself be swept along, afraid of the consequences if he resisted. The woman studied his face, then nodded. "You're not ready yet." Jones sighed. "So we kill him?" Roy's chest seized. "Wait." The woman raised a hand, silencing Jones. "No. Not yet." She turned back to Roy. "There's a man in your department. Captain Lyle Hargrove. Tell me everything you know about him." Roy's blood ran cold. Hargrove was worse than Mercer. Mercer had been cruel, but he was predictable. Hargrove? He was something else entirely. He didn't just enforce racist laws, he enjoyed it. And he wasn't just some small-town sheriff. He had connections, judges, businessmen, even senators. Roy licked his lips. "If I talk, he'll kill me." The woman smiled. "Not if we get to him first." Roy hesitated. This was the moment. The choice that would decide whether he lived or died. Finally, he exhaled. "Hargrove runs everything. The lynchings, the raids, the bribery. Mercer was just a puppet. Hargrove is the one pulling the strings." Jones and the other soldiers exchanged glances. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Where can we find him?" Roy shook his head. "You can't just walk in and kill him. He's protected." She smirked. "That's where you're wrong, Deputy." Jones chuckled. "We don't walk into places. We storm them." Roy's stomach twisted. He had just betrayed his own captain. There was no going back now. The woman clapped a hand on his shoulder. Congratulations, deputy. You've just switched sides. The cold wind whipped through the trees as Roy sat bound to the wooden post, his mind spinning. He had just betrayed Captain Lyle Hargrove, a man who would kill him without a second thought if he ever found out. There was no going back. The woman, his former target, now his captor, stood a few feet away, speaking in hushed tones with Jones and the other soldiers. Their silhouettes flickered in the firelight, weapons strapped across their backs, movements sharp and disciplined. Roy had spent years in law enforcement, but he had never seen anything like this. These people weren't just rebels or vigilantes. They were something more. Finally, the woman turned back to him. "Untie him," she ordered. Jones raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that, Commander?" She nodded. "He's one of us now." Jones let out a grunt but stepped forward, cutting the ropes binding Roy's wrists. Roy gasped as blood rushed back into his arms, his muscles aching from being tied up for so long. "Get up," Jones said. Roy pushed himself to his feet, rubbing his sore wrists. "So. What now?" The woman smirked. "Now, deputy, we pay Hargrove a visit." Roy hesitated. "You don't understand. Hargrove isn't some backwater sheriff like Mercer. He's protected by judges, politicians, even men in Washington." Jones chuckled, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "And you think that scares us?" The woman nodded toward the woods. "Let's move." Roy's pulse pounded as he followed the group into the dense woods, their movements swift and calculated. Despite everything, the gunfight, the hanging, the chaos, he was still alive. But for how much longer? The woman, still unnamed to him, led the way. She moved with a quiet confidence, her posture straight, her steps sure. Jones flanked her left, his scar catching the firelight as he adjusted his rifle. The rest of the unit, at least 10 of them, formed a loose but disciplined formation around them. Roy swallowed. "If you're serious about going after Hargrove, you need to know what you're up against." The woman didn't break stride. "Then talk." Roy took a deep breath. "Hargrove doesn't operate out of the sheriff's office. That's just for show. His real stronghold is an old steel mill outside of town. He's got at least 20 men there at all times. Maybe more." Jones smirked. "We've taken on worse." Roy shot him a look. "Not like this. These men aren't deputies, they're mercenaries. Paid killers. If you try to walk in the front door, you won't make it past the gate." The woman finally stopped and turned to face him. "Then we won't use the front door." Roy exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "You don't get it. Hargrove's got floodlights, snipers, and a full armory. He even has a Gatling gun mounted on the roof." Jones let out a low whistle. "Well, ain't that something?" The woman studied Roy for a moment. Then nodded. "Good. We have our target. Now we just need a plan." She turned to the rest of her team. "We move at dawn. Jones, take 3 men and scout the perimeter. Find us a weakness. The rest of you, stock up on ammo. We'll need everything we've got." Jones grinned. "My kind of party." Roy took a step back. "Wait. You're serious? You're just going to charge into a death trap?" The woman arched an eyebrow. "Not charge. Strike." Roy ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of what he had just gotten himself into. "I hope you know what you're doing." She smiled. "I always do." The night passed in tense silence. The soldiers cleaned their weapons, checked their gear, and exchanged quiet conversations. Roy sat by the fire, his mind racing. He thought about his past, how many times he had looked the other way when Hargrove gave orders, how many times he had convinced himself that he was just following the chain of command. Now, he was about to go to war with the man he had once feared most. Jones returned just before dawn, his face set with grim determination. "Got us a way in?" The woman nodded. "Let's hear it." Jones knelt by the fire, using a stick to draw a rough map in the dirt. "Steel mill's locked up tight, but there's an underground service tunnel running beneath it. Used to be for water drainage back when the mill was active. Now, it's nothing but rusted pipes and darkness. But it leads inside the compound." Roy leaned forward. And Hargrove just left it unguarded? Jones smirked. Not exactly. He's got 2 men watching it, but nothing we can't handle. The woman considered it for a moment, then nodded. That's our way in. She glanced at Roy. You're coming with us. Roy tensed. What? Why? Because you know the inside of that place better than we do. You'll be our eyes once we're in. Roy hesitated, then nodded. He had already crossed the line. There was no turning back now. The woman stood, slinging her rifle over her shoulder. Let's go hunting. The assault on Hargrove's compound, the sun had barely begun to rise when they reached the steel mill. It loomed in the early light, a rusted skeleton of its former self, surrounded by high fences and guard towers. Jones led them to the service tunnel entrance, a rusted grate partially hidden behind a cluster of bushes. 2 guards stood watch, their rifles slung lazily over their shoulders. The woman gave a silent signal. Jones and another soldier moved like shadows, emerging from the trees in a flash. Before the guards could react, blades slid across their throats, silencing them in an instant. Roy swallowed hard. These people were efficient. The grate groaned as they pried it open, revealing a dark tunnel that smelled of damp earth and rust. One by one, they slipped inside. Their footsteps echoing through the narrow space. Roy's heart pounded. If they were caught in here, there would be no escape. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a rusted maintenance door. Jones tested the handle, then glanced back. Locked. The woman stepped forward, drawing a silenced pistol. Pfft. The lock shattered with a quiet hiss of suppressed gunfire. They slipped inside. Roy immediately recognized the hallway they had entered. This leads to the main floor. But if we go through that door, we'll be in the open. The woman nodded. Then we stay quiet. No alarms. They moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridors, dispatching guards with swift, silent takedowns. Then, they reached a large metal door. Roy's pulse quickened. Hargrove's office is on the other side. The woman turned to Jones. Get ready. Jones grinned. Been ready. The woman turned to Roy. Stay behind us. If things go loud, keep your head down. Roy barely had time to nod before she kicked the door open. Chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded from the far side of the room as Hargrove's men opened fire. The woman and her team moved like a well-oiled machine, diving for cover and returning fire with deadly precision. Roy hit the floor, covering his head as bullets ricocheted off the steel walls. Jones took down 2 guards in quick succession, his rifle spitting fire. Another soldier lobbed a grenade across the room. Boom! The explosion rocked the compound, sending debris flying. Roy peeked over a fallen crate. Hargrove was there, crouched behind an overturned desk, barking orders into a radio. The woman saw him too. She broke into a sprint, dodging bullets as she closed the distance. Hargrove swung his revolver up. Bang! She was faster. A single shot rang out. Hargrove collapsed, clutching his chest, blood spilling across his crisp uniform. The gunfight died down. Hargrove's men, seeing their leader fall, threw down their weapons. Roy exhaled shakily. It was over. The woman stepped over Hargrove's body, staring down at him as he wheezed. He looked up at her, his face twisted in agony. Who are you? He rasped. She crouched beside him, her expression cold. You should have done your homework. Hargrove's breath hitched. Then, with one final gasp, he was gone. The woman stood, rolling her shoulders. Sweep the building. Make sure we're clear. Jones nodded, barking orders to the team. Roy sat against the wall, his hands shaking. He had spent years fearing Hargrove. And now he was dead. The woman turned to him. You did good, deputy. Roy let out a weak laugh. I think I just committed treason. She smirked. No. You just chose a side. Roy swallowed hard. He wasn't sure yet if he had chosen the right one, but there was no going back now. The scent of blood and gunpowder still lingered in the air as the dust settled inside the steel mill. The gunfight had lasted only minutes, but to Roy, it had felt like a lifetime. Hargrove's men were either dead or surrendering, their weapons discarded as Jones and the others rounded them up. The woman holstered her pistol and exhaled. Secure the perimeter. Make sure none of them have a backup plan. Jones nodded, motioning to a few soldiers. You heard her, move out. Roy wiped sweat from his brow, his hands still trembling. So. That's it. Hargrove's dead, and everything just ends. The woman turned to him, her dark eyes unreadable. Not even close. Before Roy could respond, a sharp crack of gunfire split the air. Bang, a bullet whizzed past, slamming into the wall just inches from Roy's head. Sniper. Someone shouted, the team dove for cover as another shot rang out. The woman rolled behind a stack of steel crates, drawing her pistol. Jones cursed as he grabbed his rifle, peeking out to find the shooter. Roy's heart pounded. Where the hell did that come from? Jones pointed toward the catwalk above. Up there. Bastard's got a good position. The sniper fired again, narrowly missing one of the soldiers. Sparks flew as the bullet struck a metal beam. The woman didn't hesitate. She grabbed a nearby rifle and braced it against the crate. With one steady breath, she squeezed the trigger. Bang, a muffled grunt echoed from above. The sniper staggered backward, clutching his chest. Bang, a second shot from her rifle sent him tumbling over the railing. His body crashed onto the cold steel floor below, motionless. Jones let out a low whistle. Damn good shot, Commander. She didn't acknowledge the praise. Instead, she turned to Roy. Now do you see? Killing Hargrove was just step one. His people won't go down quietly. Roy swallowed hard. So what happens now? The woman motioned toward a side door. We need to move before reinforcements arrive. Jones kicked open the door, leading them into a back hallway. The distant sound of sirens made Roy's stomach tighten. They called for backup, he muttered. The woman smirked. Let them come. The escape, the steel mill's back exit opened into a vast scrapyard, stacks of rusted car frames and broken machinery forming a maze of cover. The sirens were getting closer, red and blue lights flickering against the distant trees. How many? Jones asked, checking his ammo. Roy peered through a gap in the scrap metal. At least 4 squad cars. Maybe more. The woman remained calm. We'll handle it. Jones chuckled. You always say that, and somehow we never die. She glanced at him. Then stop doubting me. The first patrol car screeched to a halt near the entrance. 4 officers piled out, rifles raised. Come out with your hands up. One of them shouted. Roy exhaled sharply. They're not going to listen if we try to talk, are they? Jones snorted. What do you think? The woman adjusted her grip on her rifle. Take cover. Wait for my signal. Roy crouched behind a stack of metal beams, his breath shallow. He had never been on this side of a shootout before. The cops moved in, their boots crunching against the gravel. I said. The woman fired the first shot. Her bullet tore through the lead officer's shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground. Before the others could react, Jones and the rest of the team opened fire. Gunfire erupted in the scrapyard. Roy flinched as bullets whizzed past him, striking metal with sharp, metallic pings. He gripped his pistol, his knuckles white. Jones took down another officer with a precise headshot. The remaining 2 ducked behind a wrecked truck, returning fire. One of the soldiers lobbed a grenade over the truck. Boom, the explosion sent debris flying. The last 2 officers didn't stand a chance. Silence fell over the scrapyard, save for the distant howl of sirens. The woman turned to Roy. We need to move. Now. Jones waved his hand. Trucks are this way. They sprinted across the yard, ducking between piles of scrap. A row of black trucks was parked near the tree line, their engines already running. Roy hesitated. You had an escape plan the whole time? Jones grinned. We don't do suicide missions, deputy. They piled into the trucks. As soon as the doors slammed shut, the vehicles roared to life, tearing through the woods. Roy sat in the back, his mind spinning. He had spent years wearing a badge, believing he was on the right side of the law. Now, he was running from it. The woman sat across from him, watching him carefully. You scared? She asked. Roy exhaled. I don't know what I am anymore. She nodded. Good. That means you're finally thinking for yourself. A new target. They drove for hours, leaving the town far behind. Finally, They arrived at a secluded cabin deep in the woods. The trucks rolled to a stop, and the team piled out. Jones stretched. Hell of a night. The woman stepped inside the cabin, motioning for Roy to follow. Inside, a map of the county was spread across the table, marked with red circles and lines. Dozens of names were scribbled beside them. Roy frowned. What is this? The woman tapped one of the circles. Hargrove wasn't the only one. His entire network runs deeper than you realize. Judges, businessmen, even some federal agents. They all had a hand in this. Roy swallowed. And you're planning to take them all down? She met his gaze. Yes. And now? You're with us. Roy ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Everything he had known, everything he had believed, was crumbling around him. Who are you? He finally asked. She smirked. That's something you'll learn soon enough. Jones leaned against the wall. So, what's the next move, Commander? The woman picked up a red marker and drew an X over Hargrove's name. Then, she circled another. Next, she said, we pay a visit to Judge Malcolm Carter. Roy's stomach turned. He knew that name. Judge Carter wasn't just corrupt, he was dangerous, and now, they were going after him. The room was dead silent as the woman stared at the map, her finger tracing the red circle around Judge Malcolm Carter's name. Roy's chest tightened. He had been a deputy long enough to know that Carter was not just another corrupt official, he was the kingmaker of the entire county. Politicians, law enforcement, and even criminal enterprises bowed to him. Roy shook his head. Going after Carter? That's suicide. The woman smirked. So was taking down Hargrove. And yet, here we are. Jones chuckled, cleaning his rifle. Besides, Carter's the reason all this started. He was the one who protected Hargrove, covered up the lynchings, and made sure no one could touch his operation. Roy exhaled sharply. I get that. But Carter isn't just some sheriff holed up in an old mill. He has resources, real power. And he knows people in Washington. The woman nodded. Which is why we hit him fast and hard, before he even knows we're coming. She turned to Jones. Tell me what we've got. Jones grabbed a thick folder from the table and flipped it open. Judge Carter has a private estate about 30 miles west of here. Place is a fortress, high fences, security cameras, and armed guards patrolling the property. There's no way we're walking in unnoticed. Roy crossed his arms. Then what's the plan? The woman leaned forward, her voice steady. We're not going through the front. We're taking him from the inside. Roy frowned. Inside? You mean, like, infiltration? She nodded. Carter's holding a private event tomorrow night. High-level officials, law enforcement brass, and some of the biggest power players in the state will be there. Jones grinned. Fancy party for a snake. The woman continued. We go in disguised as security. Once inside, we get to Carter, take him alive, and make him talk. He's the key to exposing everyone. Roy hesitated. And if he doesn't talk? The woman's eyes darkened. Then we make sure he never gets the chance to cover this up again. The infiltration. The next night, Roy stood outside Carter's mansion, dressed in a black suit and earpiece. He could feel the weight of the pistol strapped to his side, hidden beneath his jacket. The estate was massive, elegant fountains, marble pillars, and guards positioned at every entrance. The entire place was bathed in golden light, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses spilling into the night air. Jones adjusted his tie beside him, looking uncomfortable. Man, I hate dressing up. The woman, dressed in an all-black tactical suit, smirked. You clean up nice. Jones grunted. Let's just get this over with. Roy scanned the crowd, recognizing more than a few familiar faces, senators, police chiefs, even a U.S. Marshal. If this operation went sideways, they would all be dead before they could reach the gate. Through the earpiece, one of their inside operatives whispered, Carter just arrived. He's in the main hall. The woman nodded. Let's move. They made their way inside, blending in with the other security personnel. The mansion's interior was just as extravagant as the outside, gold chandeliers, velvet carpets, and walls lined with priceless artwork. Carter sat at the head of a long dining table, laughing with his guests. He was an older man, white-haired, wearing an expensive suit that screamed power. Roy clenched his jaw. This was the man who had signed off on every crime Hargrove had committed. The man who had sanctioned the lynching of innocent people. Jones's voice came through the earpiece. "We've got 10 guards inside, 6 more outside. Armed. This won't be quiet." The woman's voice was cold. "It doesn't have to be." She turned to Roy. "You ready for this?" Roy exhaled. "Not even a little." She smirked. "Good. That means you won't do anything stupid." Then, she moved, the attack on Carter. In a blur of motion, the woman strode toward the dining table. Before anyone could react, she pulled a silenced pistol from her holster and aimed it directly at Carter's head. Gasps filled the room. Guards reached for their weapons. Bang, a single gunshot. Carter's wine glass shattered, red liquid spilling across the table. The woman's bullet had missed him on purpose. The room fell silent. Carter froze, his pale face staring at the smoking gun barrel inches from his face. The woman's voice was steady. "Call off your guards. Now." Carter's lips trembled. You have no idea what you're doing." She cocked the gun. "You have 5 seconds." Carter swallowed hard, then raised a trembling hand. "Stand down." The guards hesitated, but lowered their weapons. The woman leaned in. "Good boy. Now, you and I are going to have a little chat." She grabbed Carter by the collar and yanked him out of his chair. Jones was already moving, securing the exits as Roy helped subdue the other guests. "You won't get away with this," Carter spat, his voice shaking. "You think killing me will change anything?" The woman chuckled. "Oh, I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to make you talk." Carter's face twisted in rage. "I will never." The woman slammed him into the wall. "Wrong answer." Roy watched, his heart pounding. He had never seen anyone break a man without even firing a shot, but the sheer presence of this woman was terrifying. Jones pulled out a laptop and set it on the table. "We're live streaming this. Every major news outlet, every government agency, we're sending it all." Carter's face turned ghost white. "You wouldn't," the woman smirked. "Watch me." The camera went live. The woman leaned in close, whispering into Carter's ear. "Tell them everything. Or I burn your entire empire to the ground." Carter's breathing turned ragged. He could see the blinking red light on the laptop. The world was watching. Roy held his breath. Would the judge break? Or was this just the beginning of something far worse? Judge Malcolm Carter sat frozen, sweat beading on his pale forehead. The blinking red light on the laptop's camera signaled that the world was watching. His lips trembled, his powerful persona crumbling under the weight of the moment. The woman stood over him, her gun pressed lightly against his temple. "Start talking, Your Honor." Carter's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape that didn't exist. "You have no idea what you're doing," he rasped. She leaned in closer. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm exposing you. Every crime you've sanctioned, every person you've silenced, every murder you've covered up. You're not walking out of here unless the truth walks out with you." Roy's heart pounded as he watched Carter's entire world collapse around him. The power broker of the county, the man who had controlled the police, courts, and criminals alike, was now nothing more than a frightened old man trapped by the very justice he had denied so many. But Carter wasn't broken yet. "You think this ends with me?" He sneered, regaining some of his arrogance. "You think I'm the one pulling all the strings? I'm just a piece on the board, and you," he looked at the woman with a smirk, "you've just signed your death warrant." The woman didn't flinch. "Maybe. But first, you're going to tell the world what you did to her." Carter blinked. "Her?" The woman's expression darkened. "The black woman you lynched." Roy stiffened. The entire operation, the takedown of Hargrove, the gunfights, the infiltration of Carter's mansion, had all led to this moment. "This was personal," Carter scoffed. "You think I keep track of every..." Bang, the woman fired a round into the wall just inches from Carter's head. "Say her name," she commanded, her voice dangerously low. Carter's breathing turned ragged. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Alicia Monroe." Roy felt his stomach drop. He knew that name. Everyone in the department did, Alicia Monroe had been a well-respected professor, a fierce advocate for justice, and a woman who had openly challenged the corruption in the county. She had disappeared 6 months ago, her body found hanging from an oak tree in a remote field. The case had been ruled a suicide, but everyone knew the truth. The woman's hands trembled slightly, but her grip on the gun remained firm. And who gave the order? Carter hesitated, his breath shallow. Hargrove. Who approved it? Silence. The woman pressed the gun against his forehead. Who approved it? Carter's jaw clenched. I did. The room was deathly still. Roy felt a surge of nausea. A judge, a man sworn to uphold the law, had sentenced an innocent woman to die. The woman exhaled slowly. And who was she, really? Carter's eyes flickered with something. Recognition. Fear. Roy frowned. What does she mean? He asked, looking between them. Carter's face twisted in pain as he finally said the words, she wasn't just some professor. His voice dropped to a whisper. She was CIA. The shocking truth. Roy's breath caught. Jones muttered a curse. Even the woman's expression darkened. Carter licked his lips nervously. Alicia Monroe wasn't just some activist poking around in local affairs. She was deep cover, sent to investigate the corruption in this county at the highest levels. His voice wavered. She wasn't supposed to die. Hargrove got scared. She was getting too close. The woman's hands clenched into fists. So you let them lynch her? Carter's breathing turned erratic. You don't understand. If I had stopped them, they would have killed me too. They would have, bang, the bullet punched through Carter's kneecap. He screamed, collapsing onto the floor. Roy flinched at the sound, but he didn't move to stop it. The woman crouched next to Carter's writhing form, her voice eerily calm. You let them hang a federal agent. You let them parade her body as a warning. And then, you covered it up. Carter sobbed, gripping his leg. Please. Please don't what? She snapped. Don't do to you what you did to her. Roy finally found his voice. Who was she to you? The woman turned to him, her expression unreadable. Then, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph. Roy's breath hitched. It was of 2 young black women, arms around each other, smiling at the camera. The woman's voice was quiet, but filled with something deep and raw. She was my sister. Silence. Roy's mind reeled. It all made sense now. The relentless pursuit. The calculated precision. The anger. This had never been just about exposing corruption. This was revenge. The final judgment. The woman stood up, looking down at the bleeding judge. You're done, she whispered. Jones typed a final command into the laptop. The footage is uploaded. Every major news outlet, every government agency, it's out there now. Carter's face twisted in horror. You don't understand what you've done. The woman lifted her pistol. Oh, I understand perfectly. Roy tensed. Wait. If we kill him, we become no better than them. The woman didn't lower the gun. Then, she smiled slightly. You're right. She turned away. Carter let out a shaky breath of relief. Right before Jones pulled a remote detonator from his pocket and pressed the button, the explosion ripped through the estate, engulfing the mansion in flames. Roy barely had time to dive behind a car as fire and debris shot into the sky. The woman climbed into one of the black SUVs, motioning for them to follow. Jones patted Roy on the back. Told you we had an exit plan. Roy let out a breath, shaking his head. As they sped away from the burning ruins, he glanced at the woman. So what now? She looked out the window, her eyes unreadable. Now. She murmured. Now we go after the rest of them. Wow. What a ride. This story was filled with action, suspense, and a truth that hit hard. Corruption ran deep, but in the end, justice found a way. The question is, was it the right kind of justice? Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think they went too far, or did they do what had to be done? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading every single one, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so you never miss more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.